prime differentiator between the human animal and the human being is reason. And because it's so important, need to dwell around the idea or the notion of reason for a minute or so. It's important because from the Greeks through to the Renaissance philosophers and through to modern day philosophers, and actually you don't hear the word reason used a great deal in so-called spiritual work. There are various reasons for that, but Gurdjieff used it. He talked of objective reason. And the reason that we're talking about is not particularly what many people might consider to be logic. Logic says something like, if x equals y and y equals z, then x equals z. These are empty statements, effectively, but modern philosophers and logicians delight in playing around with those kind of things, and well, if that keeps them happy, then so be it. But the reason we're talking about is more the ability to, well, as Gurdjieff implies in the word or the phrase objective reason, to be objective. So if you are involved in some dispute with your neighbour over a barking dog, say your dog is barking in the morning and wakes your neighbour, then if you could be objective and apply objective reason, then you would say, well, yes, it's not right that my dog is barking in the morning. An unreasonable person would probably say, well, it's my dog, it's my house, my dog can do whatever the hell it wants in my house. And that is the attitude you get from probably quite a few people. So reason is the ability to a large extent to step outside your own private little hell and view the wider perspective. And maybe we'll go into how wide that perspective could be a little bit later on. So the human animal has virtually no reason, or very little of it. If you think I'm being unkind, I'm not. This is the way most of us are. And there are reasons for that, which I'll get into shortly. The human being has, in many situations, the ability to apply reason. Not every situation, because the human being still lives in a body, still has the human animal to contend with. What characterizes a human animal is the passions, the emotions, things like hatred, envy, fear, greed. There's a long list of these things, isn't there? The emotions that are effectively derived from some notion of survival. And that may not be immediately clear to you, but I'll go into it more or less straight away, actually. So the human animal is an animal that wants to survive. This drive for survival was well recognized in ancient times. People called it the conatus. It's there in every animal. You see an animal either hunting or an animal that is being hunted, and you see the conatus at work, and you see the terror in the eyes of a deer that is being felled by a lion, say, and you see the conatus at work. So survival is the main driver. Now, if things happen that threaten your survival, then you will feel what are traditionally called negative emotions: hatred, fear, and so on. If things are going well for you, things that reinforce your survival, then you'll feel what people very often call positive emotions. Think positively. They're passions, both what we call positive emotions and negative emotions are passions. They are our responses to external stimuli. So we might get a new partner that we think is particularly attractive and so on and so forth, and all of a sudden we feel more uplifted, more positive, and our world goes well. We lose a whole pile of money and we feel threatened. Now these those are sort of, I suppose, abstract, but if you are, for example, on a road driving along and someone cuts you up, your blood pressure is going to go up, you're going to feel threatened, you're going to get angry. And the road is a very, very good barometer really for how people are truly reacting to each other, because they're in a slightly competitive situation. So this is the human animal at work. It will always protect its territory, and actually more than that, it will try and grab the territory of others. So if you look at our society and you look at the way that large corporations work, the way governments work and so on, the people who are involved in those organizations are essentially predatory. They have to be to get where they are. They are the sort of alpha animals in the zoo. They are the ones who have been most successful at effectively exploiting the weaker. Again, this is all animal behavior. Lions eat weaker animals, even within a particular species. A dominant male is very often, and also maybe a dominant female, are typically established. And if any animal tries to threaten that order, then there's trouble. And the old guard may win or it may not. But this is the human animal, driven by passions. And we see that today, more than we've seen it maybe for at least 50 years. Nationalism is a direct manifestation of the human animal. Territory, this is my territory, everybody else keep out. The way that large corporations consume smaller businesses and grow into new territory, into new products, it's all predatory. And in fact, there's an excellent book called Sapiens. I would recommend, if you want to really understand the human animal, then you should read Sapiens. I forget the author's name, but it was a New York Times bestseller at one point, so it's not difficult to find. And Sapiens tracks the history of Homo sapiens. We became the most dominant form of the human species because we were the most aggressive and the most cunning. There were several species of humans, the Neanderthal being one, and of course the Neanderthal is portrayed as being this sort of brutish, clumsy thing. It's not true. Neanderthals were fairly intelligent. What they lacked was the cunning of the Homo sapiens and the ability to create abstractions. And that's a whole nother topic, and one that I may do a video on because it's a very interesting one. Abstractions like nation, abstractions like corporation, these things don't exist in reality. They're just abstract notions. But human beings are very, very good at, or Homo sapiens form this ability to group behind an abstraction. And because of that, they formed large groups that could overcome smaller groups. And so, we're a particularly unpleasant species that has come to dominate. And that unpleasantness is now being turned upon ourselves. So this is the human animal, purely driven by the survival instinct in the main. So I come to the human being. A human being is a creature that can apply reason to situations. Now, our societies are not completely animalistic. If they were, then people would be murdering each other for the least little slight. Fortunately, we have laws and what some people call the thin veneer of society. Well, thank goodness for that thin veneer, because if it wasn't there, then murders and theft and all kinds of crimes would be just an everyday affair for all of us. So you may be aware of the breakdown of law that happened in Montreal. I think it was in the 60s, possibly the 70s. And the police went on strike, I think, for 18 hours. During that time, revenge murders took place. Widespread looting, theft, you name it, murder. And the police, I think the police cut short their strike because the whole, this is a so-called civilized city. In various African nations, when law has broken down for protracted periods, then behavior has degenerated into cannibalism. And I'm not picking on Africa, it's just that is where the rule of law in a few countries happened to break down for protracted periods of time. If law broke down for protracted periods of time in any Western nation, you would end up with the same thing. So this is the human animal being let free. Fortunately, we have laws. Laws are some measure of the application of reason. And the laws basically say that, well, to a large extent, we need to respect each other's property and relationships and territory. It's mainly a territory thing. And because of that, then we don't have this widespread violence and theft and so on. So there's an example of reason being used in our society to some extent. Now, this doesn't stop people who are wealthy using very, very expensive lawyers from using reason, so-called, for their own ends. It's well known that if you want to win a legal case, you just get the best lawyers. It doesn't really matter in many circumstances whether you're guilty or innocent. You just get the best lawyers. But reason is the ability to view things in a wider context than wider than our own individual little needs and desires. So reason would say that it's not a good idea for people to lie to each other, because lying creates confusion, and the confusion is actually a negative thing, because it causes people to act in ways that are suboptimal. If someone lies to you about, well, for example, the route between one place and another, they just lie to you as a bit of a joke, then you are going to maybe spend hours and hours travelling in a direction that doesn't take you any nearer to where you want to go. So it's the same when politicians lie to the electorate. The electorate believe one thing is happening and something else is happening, and so the electorate suffers. And same when businesses lie about how they're polluting the environment, or how they're making their profits, or whether they're exploiting underage workers, and the endless lies that take place. So the human being is actually a very, very rare thing. There are shades of grey, obviously. The pure animal behaviour, then you'll see that in battlefield situations or invading armies, rape, pillage, murder. The human animal just has free rein in that circumstance. But the human being is a very, very rare thing. A being that can apply reason in situations and assess a situation fairly and act in an impartial manner is incredibly rare. So rare that maybe none of us have met such a person. Or very few of us, at least anyway. The fact that there are so few human beings is that to be able to exercise reason means that you need to have in some way been able to control the passions, the emotions. Because there's no point being in a situation where you need to use a fair and objective assessment when your passions are telling you to steal or to get your own back or to get some kind of revenge or to make yourself appear bigger than you are. Most social situations consist of people bigging themselves up. There's no reason there at all. There's no thinking of, well, here's my friend, let's have a good time together. Particularly as people get older. Because as people get older, they usually get more and more empty within themselves. And so they have to apply more and more strategies to make themselves look big. And that bigging up usually consists of boasting about property or various achievements, what they've acquired or done in their life. So the ability of people to act in a reasonable way diminishes very often. And so our planet is almost entirely populated by human animals. I think it's part of what Gurdjieff would call the terror of the situation. And there have been Enlightenment figures who have, to some extent, helped us apply reason so that we make a tolerable environment for ourselves. Dumping thousands, millions of tons of plastic in the ocean is not a reasonable thing to do. Chopping down the rainforest is not a reasonable thing to do. Polluting the air is not a reasonable thing to do. Exhausting the Earth's resources is not a reasonable thing to do. These are all the actions of a human animal that has no control over its passions. And unfortunately, the people who lead our society, both commercially, economically, and politically, are human animals in the main. That's how they've got there. So it's a fairly scary situation. And if you want to understand why mankind, the human species, just goes around in circles, then it's because the human animal will always indulge its appetite for dominating the weaker, and so all you end up with is all the psychopaths and the madmen at the top of society until it breaks down. Like in ancient Rome, characters like Nero and Caligula, totally insane, totally totally possessed by their passions. And this is what we have today. Because the laws are not sufficient to constrain all the lunatics that are at the top of our society, then we are seeing insane behavior. And it is a prelude to the degeneration of Western civilization, at least anyway. It's just the way these things work. So, to summarize, human animals are driven entirely by the survival instinct. Human beings can exercise some level of reason in their dealings with each other and in the way they organize their own lives. But human beings are very, very rare individuals. And compared with an animal, a lion in full attack, a reasonable person might look weak. However, a reasonable person would not be weak. A reasonable person would actually pull out his gun and shoot the damn thing in the head. Because that is, at the end of the day, in all of us. The reasonable person also has the animal. And as Gurdjieff said, the wolf can devour the lamb at any moment in time.